Leaker Sonny Dickson just gave us our very first look at the Galaxy S26 series. And trust me, this one's interesting. You're looking at dummy leaks that hint Samsung might be chasing Apple's design language for its 2026 flagship lineup. Instead of the usual S26 and S26 Plus, Samsung is rumored to launch three models: the Galaxy S26 Pro, S26 Edge, and the S26 Ultra, all expected to arrive in February 2026. Now here's the twist. The alleged Galaxy S26 Edge dummy looks heavily inspired by the iPhone 17 Pro. It's rocking a huge camera island across the top, stretching nearly 30% of the back panel, very similar to Apple's design. Meanwhile, the Galaxy S26 Pro and S26 Ultra seem to retain that classic Samsung vibe, but with changes. The Pro might get a rear camera island, much like what we've seen on recent Galaxy A series phones. And the Ultra? It's dropping the sharp, boxy look. Instead, the corners are now noticeably more rounded compared to the S25 Ultra. Camera-wise, don't expect a total redesign. The sensor arrangement stays the same as the S25 series, but Samsung may add a raised bump for the main three lenses, while the flash and smaller rings stay separate. Another big upgrade? The dummies hint at full Qi 2 wireless charging support. That means magnets built right inside the phone pop, so no need for extra accessories to get that magnetic wireless charging experience. Of course, these are just early dummy leaks. They may or may not be the final design, and we'll get more solid confirmation once CAD renders start surfacing. But if this holds true, Samsung's S26 lineup could be one of the most Apple-inspired Galaxy generations we've seen yet. So Samsung fans, we need to talk about something important. If you were hoping that the Galaxy S26 Ultra would finally bring us a brand new main camera sensor, I've got some news for you, and it might not be exactly what you were expecting. According to Ice Universe, the S26 Ultra is not getting a fresh 200 megapixel sensor. Yeah, I know. That sounds like a bit of a letdown at first. Instead, Samsung is sticking with the exact same ISOCELL HP2 sensor that we've seen since the Galaxy S23 Ultra. It's a 1.3-inch sensor, and while it has served us well for years, people were expecting Samsung to jump to something even bigger this time, like that rumored 1.1-inch 200-megapixel Sony sensor. But nope, it looks like Samsung isn't ready to ditch the HP2 just yet. Now, before you roll your eyes and say, well, that's boring, hold on, because Samsung is actually planning a pretty major upgrade to the lens itself. This could change the way this sensor performs in a big way. Instead of the f1.7 aperture that we had on the Galaxy S25 Ultra, Samsung is reportedly going with an f1.4 aperture. And that's not just a small tweak, that's a 47% increase in the amount of light hitting the sensor. What does that mean for you? Well, in low light situations, this is huge. More light equals better night photography, sharper details, brighter images, and less noise. It's the kind of thing that could make night mode shots look way closer to what your eyes actually see. And if you've ever struggled with blurry night photos, this kind of lens upgrade is exactly what you'd want. But here's where it gets even more interesting. A wider aperture like f1.4 isn't always the best choice for bright daylight shots. Sometimes, too much light can actually wash out the details. That's why Samsung might be bringing back one of the coolest features from the past, the dual aperture system. Remember the Galaxy S10 series? The S10, the S10 Plus, and even the S10e had this feature, where the camera could switch between f1.5 and f2.4 depending on the lighting. It was such a clever idea, but for some reason, Samsung abandoned it in later models. Now, Ice Universe is saying that Samsung might resurrect that dual aperture feature, or at least introduce some kind of variable aperture system, similar to what we've seen from other smartphone brands. If that happens, you'd get the best of both worlds: f1.4 for those dim, nighttime environments, and a narrower aperture for daytime shots when you want maximum sharpness and depth of field. That could really push the S26 Ultra's photography game to the next level without even needing a brand new sensor. And let's not forget, the sensor itself isn't exactly outdated. The ISOCELL HP2 is still one of the most powerful sensors on the market. It supports crazy high resolution, detailed zoom, and it's been fine-tuned by Samsung over the last few years. Vivo. Yeah, you heard that right. Samsung might actually be building a more powerful camera for Vivo than the one it's putting inside its own Galaxy S26 Ultra. Let's break this down, because the details are pretty wild. According to new reports, Vivo is preparing to launch its next flagship, the Vivo X300, and it could debut with a brand new 200-megapixel main camera. But here's the twist. It's being supplied by none other than Samsung itself. The sensor is reportedly called the ISOCELL HPB. Now, this isn't the rumored HP10 successor. It's actually an upgraded version of Samsung's HP9, but customized specifically for Vivo. And apparently the B in HPB stands for Blue Factory, which is Vivo's nickname. So essentially, Samsung is letting Vivo launch a custom-built 200-megapixel beast before Samsung even puts anything like it inside its own phones. Now, what makes this HPB sensor so exciting? First, it supports ultra-clear 200-megapixel shots at a 23mm focal length. On top of that, it can deliver 50-megapixel ultra-clear images at 50mm zoom. This gives Vivo's upcoming flagship a massive advantage in terms of detail, flexibility, and overall camera performance. And here's where it gets really spicy. While Vivo is getting this next-gen custom sensor, Samsung's very own Galaxy S26 Ultra is reportedly sticking with a much smaller 1/2.55-inch telephoto sensor. That puts the S26 Ultra's zoom game behind Vivo's, at least based on what we know right now. Think about that for a second. Samsung, the same company that supplies the world with some of the most advanced camera sensors, is holding back on its own flagship, while giving Vivo a cutting-edge customized sensor. That's not the move you'd expect when competition with Apple is heating up and the iPhone 17 Pro is about to raise the bar again in mobile photography. Now let's talk about the Galaxy S26 Ultra for a moment. From what we've heard, the phone is scheduled to launch around February 2026. That's still a while away, but the leaks suggest Samsung isn't really making any major upgrades to the other three cameras compared to the S25 Ultra. The only real focus right now seems to be on software and AI. And don't get me wrong, Samsung's AI push is huge and definitely going to define the next generation of Galaxy phones. But here's the question. Is that enough to keep Samsung competitive if its hardware isn't keeping pace? Because Vivo, on the other hand, is playing a completely different game. The X300 will use this HPB sensor as its main camera, while the X300 Pro is expected to take things even further by adopting it as a telephoto lens. That means you're not only getting a massive 200-megapixel sensor as your primary shooter, but in the Pro model, you could also see it redefining zoom photography. That's a huge statement from Vivo, and it puts pressure directly on Samsung's Ultra line. And here's the irony. Samsung's supply chain team is literally the one giving Vivo this competitive edge. So on one side, Samsung wants to dominate the premium phone market with the Galaxy lineup. On the other, it's supplying its rivals with world-class sensors that might outshine its own flagships. Of course, this makes business sense. Samsung's component division operates separately from its mobile division, and supplying sensors to brands like Vivo, Xiaomi, and even Apple is a massive revenue stream. But for us as consumers, it raises the question, are we going to see Samsung's best camera tech first in a Samsung phone or in somebody else's? If these leaks hold true, Samsung fans might feel a little underwhelmed by the S26 Ultra's camera package, especially in the telephoto department. The phone will probably rely heavily on AI-powered photography features to compensate for hardware that doesn't seem to be pushing boundaries. Meanwhile, Vivo's X300 series could become the go-to option for anyone chasing cutting-edge photography hardware. Now, let's be fair. February 2026 is still quite far off, and Samsung could still surprise us with a camera upgrade or even a last-minute shift in sensor strategy. But right now, the story is clear. Vivo is about to flex hard with a Samsung-made 200-megapixel HPB sensor, and the S26 Ultra might be playing catch-up when it comes to pure hardware. At the end of the day, this really highlights the split personality of Samsung as a company. On one hand, it's the biggest Android phone maker fighting head-to-head with Apple. On the other, it's a global supplier helping competitors like Vivo and Xiaomi stay relevant or even get ahead in the camera wars. So what do you think? Should Samsung be keeping its best camera tech exclusive for its own Galaxy lineup? Or is it smarter to dominate the supply chain and let rivals show off these sensors first? And more importantly, would you buy a Vivo flagship over a Galaxy if the camera advantage is this clear?